Could I ask our panelists to come forward, please? Let me introduce the two moderators of the panels going forward. First, Jan-Philippe Bourgard is a journalist, moderator, and personal advisor to the Director General of WDR-ARD, German TV, which is the largest broadcaster in continental Europe and a member of the ARD group. He holds a master's degree and a doctor's degree in political science. He has published a number of books and received several awards and recognitions for his work, including most recently a Rias Berlin Commission Fellowship this year and last year. Andreas Weiss is a reporter and editor for ZDF, German television in Mainz, Germany. During his career at ZDF, he has covered live and special reports in addition to documentaries. He received the Bronze Medal from the New York Film Festival in 1911 for his documentary 24 Hours in South Africa and was nominated for the 2004 Grammy Online Award. They will be the moderators of the panels from here on. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Natsios. I first want to tell you, to introduce the other gentlemen who are here on stage. Mr. Brok has just been introduced, and so I have the honor to introduce Mr. Dr. Sebastian Huluban to you. He worked as State Secretary of the Ministry of Defense in Romania, and he is somebody who knows very, very much about planning of defense, and from a national base, from a European, and also from a NATO base. And he will tell us also something about what happened in Romania 25 years ago.
It's an honor for me to introduce to you another man who played a very decisive role in the process of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification. I'm talking about Dr. Horst Teltschik. He has served in a number of positions with the German government, including National Security Advisor to Chancellor Helmut Kohl. And we are excited to get some behind-the-scenes stories from him about what happens these days. And we're, of course, also interested in his perspectives on the current transatlantic relationship. Please welcome Dr. Horst Teltschik.
And it will work like this. In this panel, also in the next panels, we will have short speeches by the members of the panels here on stage. And afterwards, we will go into Q&A, where we hope also on your participation. That makes our job a bit easier. Thank you. Mr. Teltschik, please, would you be so kind and start?
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to be here and to talk to such a distinguished audience. When I received the invitation by the Scowcroft Institute, it was absolutely clear that I have to accept the invitation because of my close friend, Brent. And I'm happy that you are here, Brent, and I recall all our discussions and meetings, not just during that famous period, but still till today. Well, it's not only an honor, it's a great pleasure for me to be back to Texas as well for two reasons. The first one, 3 years ago, I took part in a family reunion in San Antonio in Texas, where around about 400 members of my family were assembled. More than 100 Teltschik families live in Texas. They emigrated at the end of the 19th, early 20th century from Moravia, today's Czech Republic, in Central Europe to Texas. And secondly, it is a great honor for me to be here with you because Texas is the home of very good friends of Germany, President George Bush Sr., Foreign Secretary Jim Baker, and today Brent Scowcroft. All three of them are symbolizing one of our best periods of friendship between Germany and the US, if it was not the best period of a close friendship between our both countries and governments. 25 years ago, in May '89, President George Bush told a reporter that he I quote him, would love to see Germany reunified. And shortly after that remark, President Bush gave a speech in Mainz. This is the capital of the state Rhineland-Palatinate, where Helmut Kohl was prime minister before he went to Bonn in the federal policy. And Bush gave a speech in Mainz titled Partners in Leadership, in which he set forth his vision of Europe whole and free. His strategy relied on strengthening a partnership with Germany in a unified Europe. His call recognized Germany's continuing importance in the future Europe. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are celebrating these days the 25th anniversary of the wall which came down 25 years ago. But we have to celebrate two other events at the very same time. On August 24, 1889, Tadeusz Mazowiecki from the Solidarność movement in Poland had become the first free elected democratic prime minister of the Warsaw Pact countries. Solidarność, founded in 1980, was the first and most successful grassroots movement toppling a communist system. And I was starting in February 1989, negotiating with the last Polish communist government of Rakowski, starting negotiations about a common declaration to prepare a paper how to improve the Polish-German relations. And negotiating with my Polish counterparts, I could closely watch the peaceful transition from the communist system to the first democratic system in the Warsaw Pact countries, because I had to continue and to finalize my negotiations with the Mazowiecki government at the very end. And watching this transition, this peaceful transition, was a very important example whether Soviet Union would intervene politically or militarily as it did in the past or not. And secondly, in May 1989, the Hungarian government had decided not to maintain the Iron Curtain for cost reasons. And in June 1989, the Hungarian Foreign Minister Gyula Horn and his Austrian counterpart Alois Mock symbolically cut the barbed wire between their countries. And in August 1989, Prime Minister Miklos Nemeth and Gyula Horn came to Bonn, telling Chancellor Helmut Kohl that they would open the border on September 10th for all German refugees. 10 of thousands of GDR refugees were allowed to cross the border to the west. And I was one of the main negotiators with the Hungarians during all these years, starting in 1984, when Gyula Horn and Miklos Nemeth were just heads of the secretaries of the party, Communist Party, the one for international affairs, Gyula Horn, and the other one for economic affairs, Miklos Nemeth. And both told me already in 1984 they would like to reform Hungary, but it's not possible with Kádár, the current first secretary of the Communist Party in Hungary. They have to force him to give up his post. And they have a successor called Gross, And after Gross became Prime Minister of Hungary, after a short time, the Hungarians told me, Horn and Csula and Nemeth, we cannot move ahead with our political and economic reforms with Mr. Gross as well. We have to take over by ourselves. And I was meeting them year by year since 84 to 89, learning how they are transforming Hungary. Therefore, I could closely watch two examples of Warsaw Pact countries peacefully moving to democracy and market economy systems. And this was very important for me because, for example, Nemeth, the Prime Minister of Hungary, told me in '89, we don't ask Moscow whether we are allowed to move ahead with our political and economic reforms. We just move, we just do it. And we will experience whether they will react or not. And Gorbachev didn't react. Both examples were important for us to learn that Gorbachev kept his word, who had promised or who has told his partners in the Warsaw Pact countries during a summit in '88, Warsaw Pact Summit '88, that he would not anymore intervene in their domestic affairs. And he didn't in Poland, and he didn't in Hungary. Therefore, when the wall came down, we were not quite sure, but hopeful, very hopeful, that he would not intervene in the GDR as well. And as you know, Gorbachev fortunately didn't intervene. Well, therefore, both events, Poland and Hungary, had been a proof of Gorbachev's promise not to intervene anymore. And this was really decisive. And as you know, he started his policy of glasnost and perestroika, changing Soviet Union as well. And on October the 7th, '89, the leadership of the Communist Party celebrated the 40th anniversary of the foundation of the GDR. President Mikhail Gorbachev took part. And on the verge of the official ceremony, including a military parade, marching up with torches, the police were beating opposition demonstrators with sticks. Many got seriously wounded, hundreds were put into prison. Gorbachev's famous statement from that day is often quoted. I do believe only those are in danger who don't respond to life. On the very same day, the first mass demonstration against the GDR regime started in the city of Plauen, and on the next day in Leipzig with 70,000 people. I was really lucky that Secretary Jim Baker showed up during the anniversary of this mass demonstration to Leipzig, giving a speech and signing the piece of wall, what you would do in Washington now, Brent, this week. Within a few days, we could witness peaceful demonstrations all over the GDR country, ending with several 100,000 people in the streets shouting, "We are the people," and adding, "no violence." They had put candles in front of the Secret Service building in Leipzig. This was crucial because GDR officials had assembled 8,000 armed personnel, among them 80 police companies supported by armed corporate security militias, members of the Secret Service, special forces, and members of the army with machine guns and other weapons. They were ready to suppress the unrest. Fortunately, it did not happen. There were too many people in the streets and regional party members had intervened. The president of the GDR parliament at that time, Horst Teltschik, had publicly said, "We were prepared to meet all challenges, but not candles and prayers," because the demonstrators started their demonstration in churches, then went on street. And therefore I say sometimes we have to know prayers might help. A few weeks later, the slogan of the demonstrations changed to "We are one people." And a month later, the wall came down. Peacefully, not one shot was fired. You know, when the wall came down and Helmut Kohl prepared a speech explaining his strategy how to move to German unification, our internal expectation was it would take us 10 to 15 years to unify Germany. It took us less than 1 year, but we didn't know about that at that time. The speed was decided only by one power. These were the people of the GDR. I recall a meeting with Brent, Scowcroft, and he told me everything is moving so fast. It might be too fast. Well, the same discussion we faced in Moscow. And one member of the Politburo, whom I met later on in Vienna during a conference, he told me the think tanks of the Communist Party hasn't had time enough to check all the decisions which were made in Bonn at that time and together in NATO and within the European Union. Fortunately, they haven't had time enough to prove what's going on. You see, this was very helpful for us. Well, the only one who pushed us forward were the people in the GDR. And you know, alone in '89, about 200,000 GDR people moved to West Germany. 200,000. Mainly young families and skilled people. The GDR in autumn '89 already faced a lack of medical doctors because many of them already immediately moved to West Germany. And having been asked how they feel about, they were more or less there was more or less just one answer: finally free, finally free. And when Chancellor Helmut Kohl met the newly elected GDR leader Hans Modrow on December 19th in Dresden, thousands of people were calling for unification. And it was obvious to us that Modrow would not be able to run and to modernize the GDR. Well, I won't talk more about the history of that year. What I think what is really important is to remind you about all results from the year '89 to '91. Because we faced during this period a real peaceful revolution. The first result was Germany was reunited. Berlin, our capital, was reunited. And all neighboring countries and partners had agreed, even Margaret Thatcher. And for the first time in the German history, the German Chancellor Helmut Kohl could say in his speech in the parliament, For the first time in our history, Germany has no enemies anymore. It was absolutely new for the first time in history. Germany got back its full sovereignty 45 years after World War II. There was a final settlement for the German-Polish border. The Warsaw Pact peacefully disbanded. 500 Soviet troops left Central Europe, 370,000 from the GDR. They went back to Russia peacefully. The East-West conflict had ended, and with it the bipolar world. Europe was not divided anymore. Germany was not divided anymore, and Europe was not divided anymore. The Soviet Union broke up into 15 sovereign states. Communist ideology all but disappeared. We signed the most far-reaching arms control and arms reduction agreements between the Americans and Soviet Union, and between NATO and Warsaw Pact countries. My government had signed in 22 treaties and agreement with Soviet Union, developing a new relationship with Soviet Russia. For a simple reason. The main question for us immediately was, where will Soviet Union go along? And what is our interest? Are we interested in a non-aligned Soviet Union, and later on a non-aligned Russia? Or is our main interest an aligned Russia? And our decision was, we have to bring Soviet Union, later on Russia, as close as possible to Europe. We believed at that time a non-aligned Russia is more dangerous for the European security than an aligned with Europe. And this is my view till today. Another result is new democracies and market economies were developing more than ever again. Ladies and gentlemen, what a success story. Nearly a miracle. Isn't it amazing? Not a single shot. A peaceful revolution. It changed Germany, it changed Europe, and it changed the world. It was your president, George Bush Sr., who asked 91 for a new world order. He said publicly, we need a new world order. It happened because of a unique political and personal constellation. Solidarność in Poland, our friends in Hungary, Nemeth Miklos and Ron Jula, the courage of our common friend Michael Gorbachev, the people in the GDR, and because of the unrestricted support of our American friends, above all from President Bush and his great team. We are grateful for the unreserved trust in the German government at that time, mainly in Chancellor Helmut Kohl and his team, and for the great friendship. The Germans and I personally will never forget what the Americans have done for Germany and for Europe at that time. My friend Brent Scowcroft, the National Security Advisor of President George Bush, once told me that in 1989-90 in the White House, they sometimes held their breath, recognizing what Chancellor Kohl and his team were doing and how fast we are moving ahead. But they didn't interfere because of the mutual trust and ongoing mutual briefings. It was one of the best times in German-US relations, if it was not the best time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Teltschik. And now I want to pass on to Mr. Huluban.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Teltschik, Mr. Brok, General Scowcroft, all the other great staff at the Bush School at Texas A&M University. Thank you very much for the privilege and honor to be here today with you and underline several points from what I want to call in my presentation the perspective from far behind the wall, in both spatial distance and temporal perspective. The wall, the Berlin Wall, fell on November 1989. Further east, Romania, I would like to use a metaphor, at the end of the comet, it ended the process of liberation of Europe, Eastern Europe, at the end of December 1989. And in my presentation, I would like to focus on three major points. The first of all will be, of course, kind of personal reflection of how a young Romanian of 15 years old saw the events of the end of 1989. This will be probably the most challenging part of my talking, having next to me the sacred monsters of liberating Europe in 1989 and in front of me. And then I will focus a little bit on the 19 narratives as seen from far behind the wall, the perceptions much more than the real facts. And I will end on how, with the young generation of people of Eastern Europe, what I would call the group that I belong to, the winners of 1989, can see things as they are now in Europe and how we can do more for the future. So regarding my personal experience, my curriculum vitae of 1989, I was born in a Transylvanian town. Transylvania is the western part of Romania, and it was historical and it still is one of the most complex ethnic, religious, linguistic, and political areas of Central Eastern Europe. It used to be the easternmost outpost of the Habsburg and later on Austro-Hungarian Empire. And across the Carpathians, it bordered the other areas filled with Romanians that were bordering and shared between the Ottoman and the Russian Romanov Empire, the Tsarist Empire. So it's one of the regions that can be labeled exactly as it was with other regions in Eastern Europe, a shatter zone of empires for a very long time. And this complex, historical complex of shatter zone of empires has been present also in 1989. We cannot evade history very easily from that region. In December 1989, as I said, I was 15 years old, and I was not at home. I was visiting some of my relatives in Transylvania, in another small town. And on the day Ceausescu regime fell, I was traveling by train back to my home. And I remember when I met my parents in the railway station, they were white on their faces. They knew what happened, that the regime collapsed. Of course, we knew about the violence that started in Timișoara several days ago in the western part of Romania. But I didn't know that Ceausescu fell. I think I was among the only few, together with the other Romanians who didn't have a TV station, who didn't know that Ceausescu regime fell. And I was told by my parents, and it would be very difficult to describe to you the emotional feeling of my parents and mine as we went home from the railway station. I was supposed to become a youth communist member. It has been mandatory but the events of 1989 and the end of 1989 saved me from getting the red communist, youth communist ID. So 1990 found me as a young student in my high school, but without a communist ID. I was kind of in between. I was traveling. I was supposed to be a youth communist member, but I avoided it. And although I grew up in a totalitarian regime, I must say that we knew very well what is going on in Central Eastern Europe and what is going on in European affairs, because we had a wonderful support, and that was the only support we received from the West until 1989, and that was Radio Free Europe. It's been part of the tradition of my family of listening Radio Free Europe since the 50s. It was my grandfather's and then my father. As I grew up, I started to understand, of course, asking questions, and I was receiving a parallel education in my family. My father is a history teacher. At school, I learned the communist, Stalinist national history of Romania. At home, I had the parallel history lessons from my father. At school, we were taught political ideology lessons. At home, very discreetly, my father told me other perspectives on what was going on. So in the end of 1989, I was in a kind of dual and in-between understanding of the events. One formal at the school in a totalitarian regime, the other one, I wouldn't call it subversive, but it was a parallel and different perspective on what's going on. In 1994, 5 years after the communist collapse in Romania, I was already a student, the first series of political science students in Romania. I was already in my second year of political science undergraduate studies. In 1999, after I graduated, I've been in my first debate and conference dedicated to 1989. It was held in Timișoara by the University of Maryland at College Park, and we've been together, young students, political science students from Central Eastern Europe and the United States. In 2004, I was part already of the Romanian Ministry of Defense team at the NATO summit in Istanbul when Romania was admitted as NATO member. And in 2009, I was still working in the Romanian Ministry of Defense. This is the 20th anniversary of the Berlin Wall and the liberation of Eastern Europe. Today, at 25th anniversary, being here with you. Regarding my second point, the 1989 narratives. From everything I've studied, because I put a lot of effort in trying to understand what was going on in 1989, I think that 1989 was not just a series of events that took place in Eastern Europe. 1989 had resonated as a world event as well, because beside of what happened in Europe, in June 1989, there have been a huge uprising in Beijing in China against the communist regime, which has been violently repressed, as we all know. And we also had this watershed moment when probably the Chinese government shifted to a market economy, but maintaining a totalitarian, a communist system as a political regime. 1989 was also an important moment in the rise of political Islam. 1989 was the moment when the famous writer Salman Rushdie received a gift from the Iranian regime, the death punishment for his famous satanic verses. And also 1989, as a world event, was an important moment on the African continent with the revolts and increasing revolts against the apartheid regime in South Africa, and then the further opening of the African continent from the south to the north, ending with the so-called Arab revolts in 2012, the North African revolts. In Europe, I think that 1989 meant the end of what I would like to call the separation and division metaphors, the wall, the Iron Curtain, the East and West, and so on. And it has been also, as Elmar Brok said, the beginning of integration. From our perspective and from my personal perspective, 1989 meant not the integration so much as the reunification of Europe. The metaphor of the Berlin Wall versus the Iron Curtain. From a Western perspective and from the Germany perspective, a divided Germany meant a divided Europe. But further behind the wall, and I didn't have the privilege to talk to the makers of the revolutions in Hungary, Poland, and so on. But from far behind the wall, and at least from the Romanian perspective, the Iron Curtain, not so much the wall, meant trying to escape from a dangerous area. As I said at the beginning, traditionally and historically, the Central East European region has been called the in-between, West and East, the in-between, the shattered zone of empires, the western side of the Eurasian borderlands. An American professor, Alfred Reber, just published a wonderful book, The Struggle Over the Eurasian Borderlands. It's kind of the first part from the 16th century up to the First World War. Others call it the Central Europe, Middle Europa, and so on. But basically, it's the same area, and it tries to address the same problems. 1989 for us meant trying to escape from this regional complex and get into a stable, integrated, and open security, political, and economic area. It has been achieved, of course, with NATO enlargement and especially the EU enlargement. But symbolically and metaphorically, the perception is that we wanted to be reunified with Europe, to be part of Europe and avoid staying and remaining in this shatter zone, gray area. The wall and the Iron Curtain. Usually when empires or states build walls, borders, or borderlands, the objective is to keep others out, to filter the access of the others into your own space, area, territory, nation, state, and so on. I think that, especially behind the Iron Curtain, the objective has been different. It was to keep our nations in, not keep the others out. And this is kind of perverting the concept of borders and of curtains and of walls, keeping others out, not so much as keeping ours in. And I think we can see this thing again in Russian actions in the former Soviet republics, especially in Ukraine. It's the most evident example in Georgia, with the discreet maintenance and possible activation of the Transnistrian wound on the Moldovan territory. In Georgia and in other cases. There are different tactics to use in order to keep others, to keep what you consider your people, ours in, rather than keeping others out. It's interesting, and we felt until 1989 different proposals, and we encountered different types of friendship and cooperation. Being part of NATO and EU, we have a common sharing of friendship and cooperation. But for the peoples of Central Eastern Europe, 50 years, from the end of Second World War until 1989, half of a century, friendship could mean I can coerce you into being my friend. There is a specific Russian word, I don't speak Russian, by the way, but there is a specific Russian word concept. It's принудить к дружбе, coercing someone into friendship, not building friendship, not building together cooperation, friendship, but coercing into friendship. And this is kind of the conceptual, even maybe philosophical underpinning of how to keep people in rather than keeping others out. The wall versus the uncertain borderlands. I would like to call, as I said, this area, this traditional East Central European area, the uncertain borderlands. In the West, the wall, materially speaking, has been there. It has been material. Everybody saw it. Parts of it were right here, probably 50 meters away from the place we speak. In Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, everything was more fluid. It was not collapse of the wall and getting immediately into the idea of reunification of Germany, reunification of Europe. In Eastern Europe, Central Eastern Europe, there has been 1 month when second echelons of the communist leaderships had the possibility to think about an escape strategy. So it's beginning of November, the end of December in Romania. It was enough to give those people with knowledge and understanding, and this is not my family in Transylvania, but those who were the second, third echelons of power, the secret police, the communist political party, and so on, the possibility to understand, adjust, and prepare to become winners rather than losers of the communist collapse. To be honest, people knew that the end of the communist regime, of Ceausescu regime, was a matter of when, not of if, based on the events of the summer and fall of 1989. But for some people, the desire to be free was more important. For others, saving face and taking over political power was, of course, more important. In conceptual terms, there is, and there was a big difference, as Dr. Teltschik mentioned, Poland, Hungary, and also Elmar Brok. There has been a different type of transformation and transition in the western side of Central Eastern Europe, in countries like Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. President Bush was in July 1989 in 2 of these countries, in Poland and Hungary. The German government and Dr. Teltschik with Chancellor Kohl were keeping in touch with the Poland, Czech, and Hungarian governments. Romania was insulated and isolated because Ceausescu probably believed that he can save face. And I will tell you in a little while what's my understanding and why I thought about this. So the transition and transformation in the western side of Central Europe has been different from what happened in Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe. There has been decisive steps in democratization and transition to market economy in countries like Poland, Hungary, and now Czech Republic and Slovakia, than in Romania, Albania, and Bulgaria. And in moral terms, the rapid development of events in the Western Central Europe brought more civil society narratives into the transformation. Whereas, as I said, the 2 months distance, November, December 1989, meant another narrative in Central Eastern Europe. We still grapple in Romania, and we still work on finding the truth. I think there is no better term of contrast between the eastern side, the border of the Soviet Union, the communist satellite bordering Soviet Union, and the communist satellites bordering Western Europe, which is Germany, GDR, former GDR, than the degree of access to former secret police files. This is probably one of the most contrasting and the most important distinctions of post-1989 environment. In former East Germany, and in Germany, you have the Gau Commission and an entire effort and endeavor to open and to be transparent in opening the files, the secret files of the former Stasi, the former secret police files. And on the other hand, you have Romania, where we don't have, except the presidential condemnation, official condemnation of the communist regime, more into the opening of files. The files have been opened, but again, the time factor when they were opened raised also doubts on how much transparency has been into openness. Stasi and the Securitate, as you very well know, were probably penetrating the most their respective societies. This very devilish chain of officers, non-commissioned officers, and especially informers and collaborators of the regime. They penetrated the society probably the most in East Germany. The difference is, of course, in the approach after 1989, 1990. It's one story in East Germany, and there is another one in Romania, for instance. Why I continue, and I keep talking about East Germany and Romania, is that I read a wonderful article just before I came, which does exactly this comparison between the degree of access to secret files. And now, why was Romania so distinct from the picture of the Central East European anti-communist revolt? The first thing, I think, it's Ceausescu's regime trap. Ceausescu tried to have an independent foreign policy. He thought he can have an independent foreign policy, including good relationship with the United States, and at the same time applying one of the toughest national Stalinism experiments internally. The second thing would be the main characteristic of the regime. It has been a Stalinist, sultanist regime. Ceausescu loved to import and to use the North Korean cult of personality techniques. And of course, probably the most important was the paranoia related to the economic disaster. Ceausescu continued to dig his own hole from the end of the 70s until the end of the 80s. Why I say paranoia? Because he wanted to get rid of all national debt and trying to maintain what he thought would be an independent foreign policy without interference either from East or West. Since the time will not afford me to continue, I would be very happy to answer your questions during the Q&A and bring you other ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Huluban, for these interesting perspectives. In the beginning of your speech, no problem. You said you called yourself a member of the winner generation of 1989, and if I may add that, my colleague Andreas is a member of this winner generation as well. He was 24 and living in the eastern part of Germany when the wall came down, so you can imagine what it means for him to guide you through this conference with this topic today. And we're both very happy to be fellows of the RIAS Berlin Commission, an exchange program for American and German journalists founded by President Bush and Chancellor Helmut Kohl after the reunification. And that leads me back to Horst Teltschik, who said that that was probably the best period of German-American friendship these days. And that's a diplomatic hint that this friendship experienced some up and downs in the meantime. At the moment, we are probably facing a down period, more or less, especially after the revealing of spy activities on both sides. So, Mr. Teltschik, what can be done to strengthen the partnership and in leadership, as President Bush called it?
Well, first of all, I would say talk to one another as often as possible. You see, when Helmut Kohl was in office, it was absolutely clear that we should have a close exchange of views between both sides via meetings and via letters at that time and calls. We had many calls as well. We had a special line between White House and Chancellery. Therefore, we could exchange our views as often as we were interested to do that. And for example, for me, it's unbelievable that there's an American president who was not visiting Germany in his first period. This never happened before. And fortunately, he came in his second period to Germany. But and the other topic is you have to establish a good chemistry, personal chemistry. For me, it's absolutely fundamental that you try to establish a very personal relationship, not only on the level of the presidents, but on all levels, between the foreign secretaries, between the national security advisors, and the other main point is many people in Europe believe we are not able to influence American policy. I think that's a wrong perception. My feeling is that many Europeans are traveling to Washington and asking the president what his opinions are, and learning what the American positions are, thinking about can they contribute or not, should they accept it or not. My experience is going to Washington, you have to have own proposals in your pocket, yeah? Telling the American president, look, that's our interest. I recall, for example, a meeting between Chancellor Helmut Kohl and President Reagan after Reagan was re-elected in in November '84. We faced a situation at that time that nothing was going on between Soviet Union and United States after the failure of the Geneva negotiations on the double-track decision. There were no dialogue at all between Russians, between Soviets and Americans. And our perception of politics was at that time, if the great elephants are not communicating, there is no room of maneuver for the mice in Europe, on both sides, you see? And therefore, our main interest was how to bring them together, back to table, to negotiation table. And we ask our American friends to prepare a common communique. And if you read this communique, President Reagan was, because despite of the fact that there was a new Cold War period at the time, he promised to re-establish a policy of bilateral summits with Moscow. He promised to start again with arms reduction and arms control negotiations, and if it is possible. But he said, well, I'm ready to do that. And this was our interest, you see, and this was our proposal to him, and he accepted. And fortunately, Gorbachev came into office a few months later, and the dialogue started again. But this was our experience. You have to come forward with own proposals, and many Europeans don't do that. They are just listening. What are the interests of our American friends? World power. Can we agree? Should we agree? Yeah, and can we participate? No, the Europeans have to be more offensive, telling our American friends what our interests are, and then we have to discuss whether it fits together or not.
Thank you very much, Mr. Teltschik. Before I ask my next question, I would remind all of you, ladies and gentlemen, here in the room to, if you have any questions, we have 2 microphones over there. And please don't be too shy and ask. Okay, and my next question is to both of you, Mr. Brok and Mr. Teltschik. We are all talking about joy and happiness in the end of '89, the process of reunification. But there have been opponents of this process, especially in Europe. How did you deal that? How did you deal with Margaret Thatcher, with Mr. Mitterrand? How did you deal with with all those people that were afraid, and even the term of the Fourth Reich was quite common during that time. How did you deal with that problem?
Well, Chancellor Hammerkohl was very much surprised learning how reluctant President Mitterrand was to support him on the unification topic. But there was a simple reason. Mitterrand was anxious over Germany becoming much bigger than France at that time, and economically the strongest country in Europe. Whether this united and stronger Germany would stick to the close friendship and cooperation with France or not, and whether Germany and France will remain the driving engine of the European integration. And Helmut reacted immediately. In December 1989, he sent a letter to Mitterrand proposing a common pro-European initiative, proposing let's establish together political union. And I was asked to go to Paris in January to negotiate this idea. And the reaction of our French friends were enthusiastic. They immediately said, well, this is exactly what we are interested in. We could immediately agree on the goal of a political union, but not on any content. Yeah, but
it hasn't changed so much.
No, it hasn't changed. But you see, European integration is a process. And my opinion was agreeing on the goal. We will get content step by step, as always in the past. It's a step-by-step approach to integrate Europe. It's not just a decision. And in April 90, during the summit of the European Community in Dublin, France and Germany put forward a common initiative saying, let's establish a political union. This was a demonstration of my government. We will stick to a close friendship to France and to the European Union and cooperate further on. Therefore, in January, it was clear that Mitterrand is supporting us. Margaret Thatcher, we knew that she is opposing a German unification. I was told by my counterpart, by Charles Powell, you might recall him, Brent. Charles told me, look, don't forget, Margaret belongs to a different generation. And you have to know, she was in London when German fighters sent bombs, put bombs on London. She was a young girl in London suffering of the German attacks. And secondly, in her family lived a young Jewish girl having emigrated from Germany to Great Britain. And therefore she had a special experience with the Germans. And we were sure that our American friends will help us to convince her to go along with the German unification. For us, the main player were the Americans, knowing that the Americans are backing us from the very beginning without any restrictions. We were sure that Margaret Thatcher will follow. And she was not the most important player. The most important player was Bush and his team and Gorbachev, nobody else. Therefore, Margaret at the end is always, at the beginning she always disagreed, at the end she always agreed. This was true during the European summits, it was true in the German unification case as well. At the beginning opposing, at the end agreeing.
Thank you much. I can just make a few complementary remarks. I think this question of the political union, this proposal was of the utmost importance, and that's different to that what sometimes they discussed in Germany, that it was that the Germans were ready to give up the Deutschmarks. That is not true. Right. Because already in 1988, in the Hanover summit, Helmut Kohl has made a proposal for setting up a committee to prepare a monetary union under the chairmanship of Jacques Delors. Right. So that was before already done. So, and I think it played also a role that how smoothly it worked in the European Union. 40% of the content of the German unification treaty had already to apply, had to be consistent with European law. And in the Schäuble negotiation team was a Dutch civil servant from the Commission sent by Jacques Delors. So in the West German team was a Dutch European civil servant in order to help that it was not made a mistake to be consistent with European law, which was very much important. And I mentioned before the support of a public opinion in most of the European countries. I had here a special exercise. I was the spokesman of the European People's Party in a special committee on German unification, and where we had, on a parliamentary level so far, we had at that time already power. The In this committee were, for example, Simone Weil. She was a French minister, and she survived the Holocaust in Auschwitz. And in the beginning of our deliberations in that committee, she showed me her arm with the Auschwitz number on it. And I still cry when I think about it. She said, despite that, I will support you. And it was one of the most emotional experiences of my life. And in this deliberation there, we got then, in September 90, as we voted in the European Parliament about the Unification Treaty, on our part, we got in the European Parliament a bigger majority than in the German Bundestag. Only 5 members against, 3 abstentions out of 400 votes. That was an incredible result, support of all political groups across Europe. And that showed that this process of confidence made over the years of European integration process was so much important to get finally the support of our neighbors. This, next to that, what Horst and others have said today.
Thank you, Mr. Brok. We are all already looking forward to the luncheon later on with General Scowcroft and Secretary of State James Baker. And as a forecast, I want to quote James Baker in 1989 in December. He said in West Berlin, "As Europe changes, the instrument for Western cooperation must adapt." So as Europe is changing again now, this quote seems to be pretty counting again. And Mr. Brok underlined that when he said that the EU has to become stronger in foreign and security policy. The simple question is how?
First of all, we have to develop all the instruments and tools we have with the Treaty of Lisbon, which were not done in the last 5 years. But we had a bigger success. We have now, it was not used properly good enough, the possibility that we have now European foreign policy in one hand. It is now the same person who is Vice President of the Commission with all the foreign relations tools, is from now on, this month on, running a cluster of all foreign relations commissioners, from development policy to trade policy and all that, to get a comprehensive approach in foreign policy. She plays the role that Solana played in the past with the right of negotiations, and is at the same time the chairman of the Foreign Ministers' Council. So this is the big difficulty we have, that European foreign relations are divided between communitarian and intergovernmental policy. It's now put together under one person with an own, in the last few years, built up a foreign office with now 140 embassies abroad, with political reporting from abroad, so that we do not rely totally anymore on the reporting from national embassies. And this simple questions that everywhere, from Washington to Tokyo, every week, the 28 ambassadors meet under the chairmanship of the European ambassador. So this will have step-by-step news. If you start, it was after 1990, and the Balkan crisis broke up. Europe was totally helpless, had absolutely no instruments to do something. And if you see the development of European foreign, security and defense policy in the years, how many missions we take part? Not by far enough, not much too weak, but compared to that, an incredible development. Very successful stories like Atalanta and the Horn of Africa and many other questions. And if we don't go our way, which is not even included in the coalition agreement of the new German government, of pooling and sharing, not every European army must do everything. We can decide who does what, how to cooperate in a much better way so that we can overcome this lack of money, get more synergy effects, that we discuss common headquarters in cooperation with NATO, that we discuss, we have now a European Defense Agency, which has now to prepare, for example, joint European policy in cyber warfare, where we can discuss questions of procurement policy, research. The Commission has made proposals about that, that I think can help us all to be better. And I think there's an instrument of a Treaty of Lisbon which is totally not used until now, because the British have stopped it and the British High Representative until now in office. It's a question of structural cooperation. That means that countries the coalition of the willing can go forward in closer European defense integration policy, and so that you have not in every time a veto of one member of that, so we can have a deeper integration in that question, and we are absolutely sure that we will develop that in the next year. The decisive moment will therefore the June summit of the European leaders on defense, where this question should be put into practice, and we hopefully that it will be helpful. And I must say, so badly the situation in Ukraine is, but the pressure is always a way to get forward. You see the Rond-Point Schuman in Brussels, which is at the center of the European quarter. They're hidden in the bushes is an old monument of the real founder of the European Union and of NATO. His name was Joseph Stalin. So, and I think Mr. Putin in a moment is on his way to become a second statue there in helping European integration process.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brok. And now I think we have the first question from the audience.
First off, thank you guys very much for coming out here today. We really appreciate it. My question is, taking less than a year, did the speed of reunification in Germany ultimately hamper integration between the East and the West? And how prominent are the differences in the political culture and representation between East and West today?
You want me to answer? German reunification from the East has been clearly perceived as the backrock for European reunification. What I've tried to say in my presentation, and I would like to underline again, there have been years since we got this perception of Eastern expansion, enlargement of EU and NATO. I don't agree with this wording. Enlargement and expansion brings to those who think in terms of expansion, the negative way of expansion, negative security perceptions. The reunification of Germany has been matched by reunification of Europe, not expansion or enlargement. So the perspective is that Germany led symbolically, a reunified Germany has been, I don't know how to say, the clear path for how Europe will be reunified. Of course, we didn't know in December 1989 when it will happen to Romania as well. November, the fall of Berlin Wall, when it will happen to Romania, the liberation side. Once Germany was reunified, we didn't know when Romania will be part of a new Europe based on the reunification of Germany. So it's a kind of synchronicity. And of course, a very important thing was the US military commitment to Europe. But what I would like again to underline, these terms, enlargement and especially expansion, created a sort of negative perceptions to the region that, and country and capital of the country that Elmar Brok mentioned earlier.
May I add two things? In May, early May 1990, I had a confidential meeting with President Gorbachev in Moscow. The main topic was whether Germany would be ready to give a credit of 5 billion Deutschmark to the Soviet Union. But during this meeting, the question of membership of a united Germany in NATO was discussed. And Gorbachev said to me, well, Mr. Teltschik, why do you need NATO anymore? We will become friends now, close friends and allies and partners. Why do you need NATO anymore? And my answer was a quite simple one. I said, well, Mr. President, Might be that we might not need NATO anymore because of Soviet Union if we are close friends further on. But remember our neighbors, our neighboring countries, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Denmark, Poland, and so on. They feel themselves more comfortable with a bigger, stronger, united Germany being member of the same alliance. And I tell you, I'm still convinced of that. Yeah? We need NATO because of ourselves. We are the biggest country in the heart, lying in the heart of Europe. And people don't forget history. This is my lesson I learned in politics. Even if the history is several hundred years ago, they don't care. Yeah? And therefore, I told him NATO is indispensable for our own reasons. Secondly, when we had the meeting in Caucasus in July 90, Gorbachev, when we discussed again the membership of a unified Germany in NATO, Gorbachev gave a very simple and right answer. He said, well, Germany will be unified now and getting back its full sovereignty, the first time after the Second World War. And a full sovereign country decides by itself whether it wants to belong to an alliance and to what alliance. And I think it's still right. Yeah? It's a decision of a sovereign country whether it wants to join an alliance or not, and not of anybody else. Well, the alliance can say we are not ready to accept you, but a sovereign country can take the decision by itself. And therefore I always quote Gorbachev, because this was a simple but the right answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Teltschik. And at this point, we have to enter the panel and the Q&A. And I want to thank the three gentlemen here on stage, Mr. Huluban, Mr. Teltschik, and Mr. Brok. And we will have a break now. Then we will have at 11:30 the lunch with the speaker. And at 12:45, we will be here again with the next panel. Thank you very much for so far.